Hello, Read 581. The purpose of this screencast is to walk you through details and information for our final progress report, which was formerly titled the final case study report. So you might see that on some of the documents, but just know that they are one and the same. So I recently added in the assignment resources section, hopefully you saw this here, assignment 2, part 2, final progress report. The first document in here is the final progress report guidelines, which is actually taken straight from our course syllabus, but it might have been some time since you've taken a look at these, so why don't we start there? So as a reminder, this is part 2 of assignment 2. The other parts are the initial assessment report, which was done, initially in the course, and then the parent caregiver letter. This part of assignment 2 is worth 20% of your grade in the overall class. So the final progress report is prepared for the instructor, the parent/caregivers, and the next clinician or the school setting. It will include your pre-intervention case report and post-intervention results, and I'll show you what that looks like in the model created by Dr. Glasswell in a minute. It must include a carefully prepared data tabulation, your interpretation of the student's reading profile from assessment data, and a clear communication of the results to the student, parents, caregiver, colleagues, and our administrators. Finally, the report should contain a succinct and research-based set of recommendations for future instruction. It is important that the report contain accurate information that can be readily understood by both the parents and professionals. So you are writing to, those two different audiences there. An example of this report is provided on Titanium. It should match the objectives with the weekly intervention plan and instructional evaluations, provide a tactful presentation of needs, include recommendations for classroom teachers and parents. And then here is your due date for this final assignment. So let's now take a look. I have the sample created by Dr. Glasswell for you in Word or PDF format. So let's just go ahead and open the Word edition, because then you can modify that as needed. So here we have the final progress report. All of this information, in fact, all of this information up until the initial assessment summary, all of this can just be taken from the initial assessment report. And so I know, at first hand, this assignment might seem really overwhelming. It's worth 20% of your grade. It's pretty comprehensive and summarizes all of the work you've been doing the last, 14, 15 weeks. However, you're really just pulling information that you have from a variety of different sources and then compiling synthesis and some summary of that. So the initial assessment summary, this is going to include, what assessments were done at the start of the semester and what the results show. So at the start of the clinic, Faye's self-correction rate was very low, as was her reading rate. Faye's writing showed some promise, and the written sample obtained for pre-assessment, she tended to engage readers with the family story, but failed to elaborate and organize that story well. So basically you're just, giving some of the findings, which then leads into, given what I found initially, these are the goals that we've been working on for our time together. Now, the goals were initially put on that initial assessment report, but, through feedback from me, through conversation, we may have adjusted some of those goals as we look deeper at the data and the results. So these might have changed, but they should be on your most recent WIPR. So you should be able to just plug those in there. Next, you're going to do a summary of the instructional program undertaken. So, a proposal of this can be found on your initial assessment report. Whether or not you stuck to that that might have changed, but then, having implemented, I'm sure you have more to add to what was on the initial assessment report. So definitely start with your initial assessment report as you've communicated a lot of this information already, and then, enhance it from there. Next, you have your final assessment schedule. So this includes, what final assessments were given. And a word about the final assessments. So, initially you might have given more assessments than were needed because you wanted to do your due diligence in identifying the key areas needed for instruction. Maybe you gave a phonemic awareness assessment, but in doing that you realized, phonemic awareness is not a need of this student. We don't need to focus there, and you didn't create a goal for that. If that's the case, then you don't need to report those results in your final progress report. You should only be including results from assessments that you did a pre and post for. Okay, so definitely QRI, pre and post should be coming from that. Words Their Way would be one that would have a pre and post, writing sample. Okay, so some of these extra assessments that maybe you gave that you didn't really utilize the results, no need to report those as you don't have any comparison point for the end of your intervention session. All right, now for the next chunk of pages, I think 8 or so, you're reporting the data from the pre-test as well as the post-test, and then the findings and recommendations. So all of this is taken from the initial assessment report. But notice that we have, the first date it was administered, as well as, the most recent date. And then for the table, for the data, there is a new row here to compare how the student did overall from initial to final, as well as on each of the components. So however you would like to format those results for readability would be great. But it should be very obvious, here is how they did initially compared to final. And we can see very clearly that this student overall increased 19%, which is outstanding, and had a huge improvement in self-concept as a reader. Not as much in value, but that was already pretty high. So you want to present the data from the pre and the post, and then in your summary of performance, you're specifically talking about the difference between the pre and the post results. So, there's a markedly different result in scores from initial to final. Overall score increased by close to 20%. Most gains occurred in the area of self-concept. And then you want to make a connection to your program. So the program that we undertook was specifically designed to improve face confidence and skills, and you could elaborate how so. So it is pleasing to see that she gained significantly in the positive attitude she displays. So in your summary of performance, you want to keep it quite brief and focused, but talk about the pre compared to the post, and why those results are the way that they are. All right, moving on, we have the QRI-5 next. Again, this information coming from the initial assessment report. And something I want to tell you about that. You submitted the initial assessment report, and I have given you feedback on that. Please go back and look at that feedback, and if changes needed to be made as to how you reported results and things, please make those changes. Don't be, transferring your pre-scored information from the initial assessment report, if that makes sense. So, if there were errors in reporting or in your discussion or whatnot, please, go back and look at that feedback, improve upon your initial assessment report, and then use, the best version of that for this. So a little difficult to convey, initial right next to final. So this is nicely done, how you have all the initial results followed by the final results. And you'll see second grade wasn't given again because they'd already scored 100% or independent. So this time the clinician started with third grade and they were independent there compared to only being 80% before. And then they gave fourth grade, scored instructional, as well as fifth grade, which showed double the amount of words that the student knew, which is outstanding there. So, if a student showed mastery of something, you don't need to re-give it. If you're giving the core phonics survey or the BPST, only give them the items that they missed initially. Don't re-give the entire assessment, so you can save yourself some time in that way. So then in the summary of performance, again, you talk about the scores on word recognition from initial and final demonstrate significant growth in her ability to automatically recognize and strategically decode words in isolation. There's still some improvement that could be made, but she gained close to 2 levels in word learning in just the 12 weeks of instruction. Most notable is her success in the ability to read more words with complex vowel clusters. So a little bit of analysis, right, of these types of words that she's doing well. So not just looking at the overall scores, but some of the features of the words. And attempt words with common prefixes and suffixes with relative ease. In most cases, Faith solved more words on the list when she had extra time. So you can read that, but again, connecting to the instruction, it was pleasing to see her apply the word solving strategies that we had worked on in sessions as she completed the final assessment. So connection to the instruction provided and how, you saw some result or outcome based on that. All right, next is the QRI-5 passage reading. Again, here's the initial results compared to the final results. So you can see, the levels tested are significantly higher. And, she got instructional second grade narrative before versus fourth grade narrative. Now that is outstanding. 2 grade levels in just, 12 weeks of targeted intervention. And then here in the summary performance, a little bit more to comment on because of how comprehensive this assessment is, talking about, word recognition and oral reading, as well as, the comprehension results. Moving on, here you need to insert your final MISCUE worksheet, right, where you do your analysis of MSV. You don't need to provide the initial MISCUE analysis because here you're going to talk about how the MISCUEs compared from pre to post. But you do need to include the MISCUE analysis sheet from your post assessment. So from one of the QRIs you give in the end. And then obviously have some commentary on the types of MISCUEs that are being made. And, any thoughts on future instruction? Future instruction should include word solving using morphemic structure and some significant vocabulary work, yada, yada, yada. All right, reading fluency. So again, here you're looking at words per minute, correct words per minute. I love it when you bring in the Hasbrook and Tyndall percentile ranking because that is, I think, more concrete for parents and educators alike if we know, that's performing 50th percentile for that grade level, etc., as well as reporting results for the multidimensional fluency scale. Next, looking at writing, remember you want to provide the writing sample done by the student. And then here you want to show the initial assessment results compared to the final assessment results, but you only need to detail the final. So you don't need to provide this chart from your initial. And then here you have your summary, as well as with spelling. The way the spelling results were reported look a little differently in that the initial assessment scores follow in parentheses. So on the final 6 out of 6, initial 6 out of 6. So, essentially you could have maybe skipped the short vowel words if you were doing this assessment, but good to have the comparison. Digraphs and blends, 13 out of 13 compared to 11 out of 13. Long vowel patterns only had 1 out of 4 initially, now had all 4 of them, which is outstanding. 4 out of 6 compared to 5 out of 6. So that's how it's reported here. You may choose to format it differently, and that is great. Feel free to take the liberty to do that. All right, and then the next section is going to be your overview of progress to date. So this is going to break it down, in each of the key areas that you have been focused on and kind of specify the improvement that's been made here. And then, what work still remains. As you guys found out, there's a lot that you can focus on in these sessions, but you've had to really be strategic and pick and choose your battles, right? So here you comment on, the work you've done, the progress you've made, but then goals for moving forward. And then lastly, you wrap up with recommendations for home and school. And these recommendations should be research-based. You can utilize things that you found successful with the student that they can continue to do at home. You could also, utilize all you've learned from our course readings this term and put those in here as well. But, notice that there is detail and specificity here in the recommendations. All right, the last thing I wanted to show you is the rubric for the final progress report, which looks very similar to the initial assessment report. So the first thing you're being scored on is not the background of the student, which is what this was for the initial, but instead a recap of the initial assessment report. So, providing the client's history, the, assessment results initially, and then the goals that were determined. You'll be scored on assessments, the assessment process that you did, making sure that your assessment description and write-up contains complete results. Analysis and diagnosis, so really looking at, how you've identified the strengths and challenges still present in that area of reading given the post-assessment results. And then the results of intervention and evaluation of progress, which is a little bit different from the initial. You are, reporting how progress has been achieved and addressed for each goal. So, here's the change that's happened since instruction. Here's how the instruction may have contributed to that change or not have contributed to that change, and just being reflective there. And then the last two elements to be scored on is, as you're familiar with from last time, organization, spelling, and grammar. But here again, we have recommendations. So making sure you have quality recommendations, they're complete, they address the areas of student need, the information is clear, and it's precise to the point that someone could then read this and go and implement and do something with it. It's not saying, please read with Faith at home. Okay, well, read what? How often? Where? What should we work on as we read? Are there questions we should be asking her? What are sample questions she could work on? Is there a monitoring strategy or technique that would benefit her? So there you have it. Feel free to email me with questions or needs as you get started working on this assignment, but it's very similar to the initial, but now just adding in the final assessment results for all those post-assessments you're giving, reflecting on, where growth was made and why that might be, and then now what can the student do moving forward to continue on this trajectory. So good luck with you, or good luck to you on this assignment. You're almost done with the semester, so just hang in there.